This is the story of Leif and how the Vikings came to explore Canada. So we have to first figure out who were the Vikings and why would they have come to Canada. And to start that story, we need to understand that the Vikings were the biggest, baddest marauders in the entire of Europe. When the people of Europe, especially along the coastlines, saw that very distinctive prow come into view over the ocean, they just got out of the way, because the Vikings had this incredible reputation for violence and just taking what they wanted, and it was a pretty brutal reputation to have. So in order for you to be kicked out of being a Viking, I mean, seriously, how bad do you have to be? But a guy by the name of Eric the Red was in fact kicked out of being a Viking. And he was kicked out because he broke the one Viking rule, and that was you don't kill another Viking. So he left Iceland because he was banished, and he ended up in Greenland. And that would have been in about 981 of the Common Era. Now, the Greenland is, its name is propaganda, because when Eric got there, he decided he didn't want to be all by himself. He thought this was terrible. And so he actually snuck back to Iceland, and he started talking to people in Iceland. And of course, they were experiencing a terrible drought at the time. And so everybody was very hungry, very poor. And he's telling them, oh my goodness, there's this place. It's fantastic. I don't have to go fishing. I just put my skillet over top of the river and the fish jump right into into the pan. And everybody's going, well, maybe it was a bad idea to kick Eric out. Maybe we should go with Eric. And so they begged him, please, Eric, take us with you. And he kind of pretends to be reluctant. It's like, oh, well, okay. And so he takes 3 shiploads of people with him to Greenland. And of course, they anchor in the harbor. And what do they see? They see a massive amount of ice, rock, and snow. Eric, what's going on here? No, he says, it's fine. It's a few kilometers inland. It's a few miles inland. You got to walk for a while. Okay. And so they started to walk. And they walked and they walked and they walked and they walked and they walked. And you know what they saw? Rock and ice and snow. And rock and ice and snow. And they walked and they walked and they saw rock and ice and snow. And after a while, somebody says, hey, wait a minute. Eric's a liar. Eric's always been a liar. Why did we believe him? And everybody goes, oh, of course. Why have we believed him? That's it, guys. Back to the boats. And they turn around and they head back to the boats. And when they got to the ocean again, Eric had burned the boats. And so they were stuck. So Eric now is in charge of a whole bunch of people who are stranded in Iceland. One of those people is his son, Leif Erikson, also referred to as Leif the Lucky. Now, back then, you were considered a man much earlier than you are today. And so at the age of 16, he took a boat and he went exploring. And in his travels, he ends up in Norway. Now, when he got to Norway, the Norwegian king did not really like the idea of this Viking kid being there because, you know, Vikings have a tendency to invade other places, including each other. But this would have been King Olaf the First. And the thing about King Olaf the First was that he was the first Christian king of Norway. And he was very, very interested in the idea of Christianizing the entire country. And so when Leif gets himself into some trouble and he comes to the attention of the king and the king wants to execute him, Leif does this whole, no, I didn't come here to invade you. I came here to learn about Christianity, which delighted the king. And so he invited him to come and live with him so he could teach him about Christianity. While he's living with the king in the castle, he meets the princess, and trouble ensues. And after about a year of stringing her along, the princess goes, Leif, when are we going to get married? And Daddy is also getting a little tired of being strung along, and he's going, when are you going to be baptized? And so Leif, being only 16 or 17 at the time, solved his problem in the best way he could think of, and that was to go down to the wharf, get his ship, and leave. Now, here is a lesson to be learned from Leif Erikson to everybody in this era, all these years, 1,000 years later. And it goes like this. Never, ever, 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 ever tick off somebody whose daddy owns his own army. Because the Norwegian army gave chase. And so Leif makes his way back home. But he gets to Greenland. Daddy finds out that the Norwegian army is on his tail, and he goes, oh no, son, you're not bringing that trouble to me. I'm not having anything to do with him. And he kicks him out. So Leif goes to the wharf and does the thing that he thinks is the most reasonable to do. He gets drunk. And while he's in the pub, and he's having, 1 or 2 cups of courage, he meets a guy by the name of Bjarni Hjörleifsson. Now, Bjarni is a Viking, but he's not very good at it. He keeps getting lost. Every time he goes out in his ship, he gets lost. And so the two of them are drinking and they're commiserating. And in the process of their conversation, Bjarni tells Leif about a weird thing that happened. The last time he went out, he saw land on his left. And there should not have been land on his left. And Leif thinks to himself, wait a minute, that means it's super secret land. And if it's super secret land, then the King of Norway doesn't know it exists either. And so he bought Bjarni's boat, hired his crew, and he took off to find this land. So he first lands on Baffin Island. Now, Baffin Island looks an awful lot like Greenland. A lot of rock, a lot of ice, a lot of snow. He did not like this place, so he called it Helgeland, and he left. Then he ended up in Labrador. Now, this place, it had meadows, it was fairly flat. It seemed like a pretty good place to raise horses, so he calls it Markland, mark being the term for horses in the Nordic language. And he finally ends up in Newfoundland. And he likes it here because he saw what are probably gooseberries, but he mistook them for grapes. So he called the place Vinland. And we know for sure that this is where they did end up, or at least the Vikings. We don't know specifically if Leif did, but the Vikings were there because at a place called Lens au Meadow, there is an archaeological find of a Viking village. So we do know that they were there. So this is the voyage that he took. And so Baffin Island was called Helgeland, and Labrador was Markland, and Newfoundland was Vinland. Now, when they were on Vinland, they did encounter indigenous people, but they had never met people that were of such a different color from them, and they didn't quite know what to make of them, so they called them Skrælings. Now, Skræling is not a very nice term. It is meant to describe a type of troll in Norse mythology, so please don't use that term. But this is what they referred to them as. Now, we think, or historians think, that these would have either been the Beothuk people or the Mi'kmaq people. The greater likelihood is that they were the Beothuk people, because the Beothuk people, culturally, they would put red ochre on their bodies, and the sagas refer to these red people. Now, the Vikings did something rather stupid, and that is they killed a couple of the Beothuk, or the indigenous peoples. Now, you've got to remember, they were used to the idea that everybody was afraid of them, because they were, after all, the biggest, baddest marauders in all of Europe, right? The problem with this particular set of circumstances is that the indigenous people had never heard of them. And they didn't know they were supposed to be afraid. They didn't know that they were supposed to lose any battle that they had with these Vikings. And so when they attacked the Vikings, when the Beothuk people attacked the Vikings because they had killed some of their people, they won, which probably surprised the living bejesus out of all the Vikings, but they scrambled back into their boats and they took off. And that was the last of any of the Europeans that would have been in Canada for about 500 years. And that's the end of this story. What happened to Leif after this? Not relevant to Canadian history, but you can look that stuff up yourself. All right? Thank you.